Roald Dahl's The Magic Finger, illustrated by Quentin Blake, published by Puffin Books, Part 3. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg ran to the window and looked out. 2 tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Gregg said to Mr. Gregg, "Do you think we could do that, my dear?" "I don't see why not," Mr. Gregg said. "Come on, let's try." Mr. Gregg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once up he went. Then Mrs. Gregg did the same. "Help!" she cried as she started going up. "Save me!" "Come on," said Mr. Gregg. "Don't be afraid." So out the window they flew, far up in the sky, and it did not take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried William. "I've always wanted to know what it feels like to be a bird." "Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear?" Mr. Gregg asked Mrs. Gregg. "Not at all," Mrs. Gregg said. "I could go on forever." "Hey, look down there," said Philip. "Somebody's walking in our garden." They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what is more, they had great long arms like men instead of wings. The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Greggs' house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high in the air. "Stop!" called the tiny Mr. Gregg, flying down low over their heads. "Go away, that's my house!" The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out her hand and opened the door of the house and went in. The others went in after him and shut the door. The Greggs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Gregg began to cry. Oh dear," she sobbed. "They've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go." Even the boys began to cry a bit now. "We will be eaten by cats and foxes in the night," said Philip. "I want to sleep in my own bed," said William. "Now then," said Mr. Gregg, "it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we're going to do?" "What?" they said. Mr. Gregg looked at them and smiled. "We're going to build a nest." "A nest?" they said. "Can we do that?" "We must do it," said Mr. Gregg. "We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me." They flew off to a tall tree and right at the top of it, Mr. Gregg chose a place for the nest. "Now, we want sticks," he said. "Lots and lots of sticks. Off you go, all of you, and find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off. Soon they were back carrying sticks in their mouths. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build the nest. "More," he said. "I want more and more and more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while he said, "That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. "I feel I might lay an egg any moment." The others all got in beside her. "How warm it is," said William. "And what fun to be living up so high," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "But what about food?" said Mrs. Gregg. "We haven't had a thing to eat all day." "That's right," Mr. Gregg said. "So we'll now fly back to the house and go in by an open window and get the tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." "Oh, we will be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Gregg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got to the house, they found all the windows and doors closed. There was no way in.